Welcome to the deep dive. You're here because you want to get past the headlines, really understand the details.
And that's what we aim for. Today, we're looking at something lots of people are talking about, mobile phones in English schools. Should they be banned?
Exactly. We've been digging into reports from BBC News and The Guardian, both fresh from April 10th, 2025.
And what really jumps out is, well, almost everyone seems to agree schools need some kind of restriction. The numbers are really high.
They are. But scratch the surface, and there's this whole debate, isn't there? National mandate versus letting head teachers decide.
And also, how much can schools actually do about the bigger picture? Kids' screen time generally.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack all that. What are the actual policies now? What are the arguments for and against going national with a ban? And yeah, where does this fit with online safety and everything else?
Let's start with the baseline then. What's the situation right now, according to the data?
Okay, so this survey, commissioned by the Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel D'Souza, it paints a pretty striking picture.
Striking how? What are the headline figures?
Well, get this. 99.8% of primary schools have some kind of phone restriction. Nearly all of them.
Wow. Okay, 99.8%. That's almost universal for primary.
It really is. And for secondary schools, it's still very high, 90%.
90%. So the vast majority of schools are already doing something. What do these restrictions actually look like in practice? Let's start with primary.
For primary schools, it seems pretty clear-cut, mostly. About 76% either make pupils hand their phones in when they arrive, or they just say leave them at home.
Okay, so basically, remove the phone from the child's possession during the school day. Makes sense for younger kids, perhaps.
Seems to be the prevailing logic, yeah. Now, secondary is a bit more mixed.
Right, older kids, more likely to have phones. What's the main approach there?
The most common policy used in roughly 79% of secondary schools is phones away and not used.
So you can have it with you, maybe in your bag or locker, but it shouldn't be seen or heard.
Precisely. Keep it out of sight.
But not necessarily handed in.
Yeah, not always. Only about 8% of secondary schools require handing them in. And even fewer, just 3%, ban them from school grounds entirely.
Interesting. And you mentioned some actually allow them in lessons.
Yeah, a small fraction, nearly 6%, do allow phone use during lessons, but, and this is key, only with specific teacher permission.
Okay, so some are maybe experimenting with integrating them carefully.
Possibly. But it's crucial to remember what these reports also say. The survey just tells us the policies exist.
Right. It doesn't say how well they're enforced or if they're actually, working. We don't have that effectiveness data from this survey.
Exactly. So rules are widespread. But the big debate swirling around is, should it stay like this, school by school, or do we need one rule for everyone?
Which brings us smack into that central tension. National ban versus head teacher autonomy.
Let's unpack that. Where does the Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel D'Souza, stand?
Her position, according to both the BBC and The Guardian, is pretty clear. She backs the head teachers, meaning she believes they are the best people to make the call for their own schools. They know their kids, their context. She supports heads who do ban phones, but thinks it should be their decision.
Okay, so trust the person on the ground. Local knowledge is key for her.
That seems to be the core of it. Flexibility.
But then you have Daniel Kebede, General Secretary of the NEU, the National Education Union. He sees it differently.
Very differently. He's quoted strongly favoring a statutory national ban legislation.
And why? What's his reasoning for taking it out of the hands of individual heads?
He makes a few key points. First, he thinks it would actually help parents, give them clarity, a single rule to work with.
Okay, so less confusion for families if the rule is the same everywhere.
Yeah, and second, it would take the pressure off schools. No more having to invent, justify, and police their own specific rules, which can cause friction.
Right, removes that burden from individual school leaders.
And thirdly, just uniformity. He argues it would help build a culture where it's just accepted, phones aren't part of the school day.
So, consistency, less administrative burden, and fostering a phone-free school culture are his main arguments for a national approach.
That sums it up well.
Okay, so those are the arguments for a national ban. What about the arguments against it, which seem implied by Dame Rachel's position?
Well, the main counter-argument is essentially the flip side of Kebede's points. It's about flexibility, isn't it?
How so?
The idea that a one-size-fits-all national rule might just not work for every single school. Different schools, different kids, different communities. They might have very different needs or challenges.
So a blanket ban might be too rigid. It might not suit, say, a school where some kids rely on phones for travel or have specific needs.
Exactly. Proponents of head teacher autonomy would argue that local leaders can tailor the rules more effectively to their specific situation. They have that nuanced understanding.
That makes sense. It's the classic central control versus local autonomy debate, really.
It is. And both sides seem to agree on something else, though. This isn't just about what happens inside the school gates.
Ah, yes, the wider issue of screen time. What did the Children's Commissioner's other findings show?
Right, this separate survey of 8 to 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
It's quite eye-opening. 69%. So more than two-thirds spend over 2 hours a day on a device.
2 hours. Okay.
And maybe more concerning, almost a quarter, 23%, are spending over 4 hours a day on devices.
Hours or more. Wow. And Dame Rachel's point is, this is happening when?
Mostly outside school hours, which, really underlines that banning phones in school, while maybe helpful for focus during lessons, isn't tackling the bulk of the screen time issue.
So it's a much bigger beast.
Absolutely. And that's why she calls for, more support for parents trying to manage this stuff at home.
Helping parents set boundaries, manage online activity.
Yeah. And she also puts the onus on the tech companies themselves, saying they need to design their platforms to be safer for kids from the get-go.
Which connects directly to the concerns about online harms, something Daniel Kebede was very vocal about, too.
He really was. The reports mention his concern about the, quote, damaging impact of mobile use and online harms.
He raised specific issues, didn't he?
Yes, he specifically mentioned the accessibility of hardcore pornography, even for young children, and the potential negative consequences of that.
That's a serious charge about accessibility.
It is. And it leads him to argue for much broader action, beyond just school phone policies.
Like what?
He explicitly calls for a social media ban for under 16s.
A full ban for under 16s.
That's what he advocates. He draws a parallel, saying platforms like TikTok and Instagram need regulating, much like tobacco companies were, because of their perceived link to rising mental health issues in young people.
That's a strong comparison. Is the union pursuing this?
Well, the reports state the NEU is set to debate motions at their conference, pushing for greater regulation on social media firms, specifically to get harmful content removed faster and more effectively.
Okay, so a clear push from the union for government and industry action on the platforms themselves. What is the government saying in response to all this?
The official government line, via a spokesperson, points to the Online Safety Act.
Right, the new legislation.
They say it already requires platforms to take down illegal content and will soon include measures to protect kids from other harms, like misogyny or content promoting violence.
So they feel the act is the mechanism to address those online harms.
That seems to be the implication. And on the school ban specifically, they reiterated their existing guidance.
Which is?
That schools can restrict phone use, they have guidance on how, but ultimately it's up to head teachers to decide exactly how to implement it. They back the heads.
And the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, what's her stance?
She strongly agrees phones have absolutely no place in classrooms, seeing them as disruptive.
Okay, clear on that point.
And she feels the current approach backing head teachers to make the call is working, pointing to those high percentages of schools that already have bans as evidence.
So the survey numbers are being used to say, see, heads are doing it, we don't need to force them.
Essentially, yes. And it's noted that a conservative amendment that would have mandated bans in all schools was actually rejected.
So the government position seems pretty set. Guidance, yes. National mandate, no. Rely on the Online Safety Act for broader harms.
That appears to be the current stance.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the survey didn't assess effectiveness, but there was a related point in the BBC article about another study.
Yes. That's a really interesting wrinkle. A link in the BBC piece pointed to separate research published back in February.
And what did that study suggest?
Well, it suggested that these widespread mobile bans in schools might not actually be leading to noticeable improvements in grades or student behavior.
Really? So, despite nearly all schools having bans, this other research questions if they're making a difference academically or behaviorally.
That seems to be the finding, yes. It definitely adds a layer of complexity. If the bans aren't clearly boosting grades or improving behavior, you have to ask what are they achieving or what else needs to happen.
It certainly complicates the narrative that bans are a simple fix.
It does. And interestingly, Dame Rachel D'Souza herself seems to acknowledge this isn't straightforward.
How so?
Her own report recommends that the government should actually fund more research into the impact of phone restrictions, especially looking at social media use.
So even while supporting head teacher autonomy within schools, she sees the need for a bigger evidence base on what works, particularly regarding social media's effects.
Precisely. It suggests an awareness that the picture is bigger and maybe more complicated than just the school policy itself.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We have near universal restrictions in primary, very high levels in secondary, mostly out of sight, not used.
Right, but a real disagreement on whether making this a national law is the right move, weighing consistency against flexibility.
And layered on top of that, maybe the more significant issue, the sheer volume of screen time happening outside school,
Yeah, those figures, 2 hours, 4 hours plus, it shows school policies can only ever be part of the solution, potentially quite a small part.
which points towards the roles of parents and the tech companies as being absolutely crucial in navigating this whole thing.
Definitely. While schools are clearly acting, the data suggests the bigger challenge lies beyond the school walls.
This has been, well, a really revealing deep dive. It's not as simple as just ban phones, is it?
Not at all. So, for everyone listening, thinking about all this, the high rate of bans already, the debate over a national rule, the huge screen time outside school, the online safety worries, what do you think is the most effective path forward?
Is it about fine-tuning those school rules? Or does the real work need to happen with parents at home or by putting more pressure on tech companies? Or maybe most likely some tricky combination of all three? Lots to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us.